Greetings. Hope this video finds you well. Today I am doing my second video on the Sermon on the Mount in my Random Thoughts on Scripture series that I'm starting during these quarantine times in hopes that we can get a little Bible study going, at least Bible talk via line, because it's been very hard for me to figure out a time when we can actually have a video conference because of all the craziness that's going on. So I encourage anybody to interact with me, disagree, agree, either is fine. And today we're getting into some really easy topics to talk about. So let's dive in. The first part as we go into this next section of the Sermon on the Mount is concerning adultery and divorce. Yes, like I said, easy topics to talk about. So let's dive right in. We begin with, "You have heard it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to go into hell. It was also said, 'Whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce.' But I say to you, anyone who divorces his wife except on the ground of unchastity causes her to commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery." Yeah, like I said, easy stuff. The first thing I want to address is the idea that only a man can divorce his wife. A wife can't divorce a man. That was the way it was back in the day. It was only women were property. It was unfortunate. And so that's really the first kind of sexist thing in here, is that this idea that a woman can't divorce a man for being unfaithful, but a man can divorce a woman for being unfaithful. That's not really fair. But that was the way the world was, unfortunately. So thankfully, we've changed. At least we've moved forward in some respects. So this idea of you shall not commit adultery, that's just by looking at someone, you've already committed adultery in your heart. And then this idea of what is causing you to sin. This idea is this, the first thing we got to remember is that what we see in the Sermon on the Mount in particular is this going to extremes, that you have to hold yourself up to this ideal that is seemingly insurmountable. You can't get there. But basically what Jesus is trying to say is that even though we can't be perfect, things are going to drag us away, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't at least try to do these things, to at least try not to sin. It's not meant to be just to bring us down. It's meant to actually help us know what we should be striving for. An old way of interpreting the Sermon on the Mount is that this was to show us how incapable we are of doing these things. And therefore, it was this idea of just give up and give in to God. Yes, we need to rely on God. That is exactly right. The only way we can even get into heaven, be saved, is through the grace and love of God. But doesn't mean that we can't at least try to look at some of these things and examine how we may be succeeding or failing in these different areas. So when we first look at these verses about adultery, we have to look at ourselves as yes, maybe we are not cheating on our spouse, but maybe we are having lust within us, and what in our lives is causing that lust to grow and to look at other people besides our spouse, whether man or woman, and really examining what is driving us to that, and What are the better ways that we should engage and put our attention back on our spouse? What is causing us to stray? And what are some ways that we can prevent ourselves from straying our thoughts and to actually focus whatever those thoughts are we are putting outside of our relationship and help us put them back into our relationship and put them back towards our loved one. And so I'll leave it at that. Now, about divorce. It's interesting to me that while we have a whole section of Christianity that goes against LGBT people, there's so little voices out there about divorce and how socially acceptable divorce has become within our world. And I know that makes me sound very Roman Catholic because they're the only ones that are really in there to saying, you shouldn't divorce. And they've taken it kind of to an extreme in some respects. But in some respects, they're right. I mean, marriage is something we really need to hold more sacred in our culture. And I say that, and then I will say this too. My parents getting a divorce saved their lives. They needed to do it because of the self-destructive behavior that was going on. And if that hadn't happened, then we wouldn't have had all the years that my brother and I had with my parents. If they hadn't gone through that painful time of going through divorce and my dad healing himself. That being said, it was painful to go through that. My brother and I did not react the best to it, and we did not have the most wonderful adolescence as a result of having our parents become divorced. And I think that that's a very key thing that a lot of people lose sight of when they're looking at divorce, is how it affects the family. That it is more than just the two people who are getting divorced. It is the children, and how they are then going to have to grow and interact as they get older. Sometimes divorces need to happen. That is absolutely true. This is not an entirely black and white issue. There are people who need to get away from their spouses. There are people who are in unhealthy relationships for one reason or another, and this needs to change. But those oaths that people take when they get married are something that they need to seriously take on. I mean, they need to really consider. And what's funny is that all couples, when they first get married, they don't realize, I don't think, just how serious those oaths are, especially young people. I think older people who have been through marriage might take it a little bit more serious. But especially when you're young, you don't realize the struggles that you're going to have to. A marriage is one of the hardest things that two people will do with each other. And it's also one of the most rewarding and great things that people will do. My wife and I have had our struggles throughout our lives, but we love each other so much more now than we did when we were married. And yet we still struggle. And we still have to reorient ourselves constantly to the different realities that we are facing and going through as we hit different periods in our lives. That's just the way it is, and discover who each of us is. That's what marriage is about. As people, we change, and the oaths we take that and I don't want to say oaths because we're going to get into something in a few minutes about that. But that commitment we make to each other is that we grow together and learn how to grow and together and somehow make it through those challenging times And just why love changes over time. It evolves with the people and becomes different. And we have to be willing as adults to go through those changes together. And if you're not willing to, then you need to really examine, should you be getting married at that point in time? Are you truly ready to spend the rest of your life with a person? Because you really should be planning on doing that. So that's all I'm going to say about that. But like I said, sometimes it needs to happen. Sometimes, but we do need to take it more seriously, in my opinion. Now, the next... Oh, and this, whoever marries a divorced person is committing adultery. I think that comes with that idea of when we take divorce too lightly. When we're just divorce somebody just so we could be with another person without honoring the relationship that we've already committed to. So that's where I kind of see that going into, is this idea of like taking it seriously. When you jump out of a marriage just because you're feeling lust for another person, then yeah, you are kind of not, you're not honoring the commitment you've made and the commitments that you both made together. All right, now next part is oaths, and this is why I had an issue of saying oath. So here's the text regarding oaths. Again, you have heard that it was said that those of ancient times, you shall not swear falsely, but carry out the vows you have made to the Lord. But I say to you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is the footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let your word be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything more than this comes from the evil one. So basically what this text is trying to remind us of is that our ultimate loyalty goes to God. And to swear your loyalty to anyone else interferes with your loyalty to God. This is why you will see in some wedding ceremonies, the two couples will swear to God and then to their spouse, so that it is acknowledged that your oath to your spouse is subservient to your oath to God. And it's also why certain Christian groups refuse to say the Pledge of Allegiance or any other oath that one would take that would somehow could possibly put you in conflict with God. That your allegiance to your government and your state could possibly cause you to compromise on your faith principles. And this is what Jesus is trying to make sure that we don't, that we, no matter where we are, we do not compromise our faith principles as Christians. That allegiance to God is number one. And that can be hard if our society is teaching us another way. It also, I want to make sure that people don't think about this as swearing, like saying the F word or whatever like that. That's not what they're talking about. I personally don't think God cares whether you swear or not. Your use, whatever kind of language you use, is not really God's concern, except for when you use language to hurt another human being. That's where God really cares about what we say. It isn't about whether we say a certain word like the F word or whatever. It's about how we use our words, because depending on how we use a word, it could be far worse than what people consider swear words. That doesn't mean that one shouldn't remember how to watch their tongue if their type of language they're using is hurting those around them. Like if somebody really is offended by them, you should probably try to refrain just to respect that person. So that's what I'll say about that. And then finally, another really, really easy topic concerning retaliation and our love for enemies. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer, but anyone who strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. If anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Give to everyone who begs from you, and do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on evil and on the good, and sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Even the tax collectors do the same. And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Be perfect. You can be perfect. We should all be perfect. Yeah, we're not perfect, but we can try. And that's what we're going for here. So that first part of retaliation, turn the other cheek, and take your coat, then give your cloak as well. This is really what is the basis of the civil rights movement under Martin Luther King Jr., is this idea that you shame the person committing violence against you when you refuse to retaliate with violence. And it was very, very effective. And especially when you are able to do this in a public manner, to show just how evil those who do violence are. And those who choose to not suppress those anger and hate sides of who they are. Because if you look at this, violence should never be a solution that we'd first go to. It should always be a last resort in defense of one's life, in my opinion. We should always, anyone that we are in conflict with, whether it's just a simple disagreement or whether it is actively ideologically opposed to them, we should always remember that they are beloved children of God, just like us, that they are human beings just like us. And while we may not be able to interact with that person because of the anger and the feelings that they rise up within us, that doesn't mean that we need to hurt them. We should always seek whatever ways we can for reconciliation and love. And to look at each other as fellow human beings, to remember that we are all people sharing this planet. So often I hear on, whether it's in the media or on social media and Facebook and Twitter and all those places, this way of dehumanizing those we disagree with by placing various labels on them. Whether it's conservative, liberal, or whatever you can find, Christian, non-Christian, whatever, people use these kind of labels on each other as a way to make them seem less human to them and less personal to them, so that they can insult them and attack them. Because the more you dehumanize a person, the more you're able to dismiss whatever they might have to say. This has been a tactic that's been used throughout human history. Early settlers in America used to say that Native Americans did not have souls because they didn't see them mentioned in the Bible. And they kept repeating this idea that because Native American peoples were not mentioned in the Bible, they can't be real people, which made it easier for people to justify killing them. In the same way, concerning African Americans and slaves in America, it was this idea that they are not quite as intelligent as white people, that they aren't that they follow false gods, that they found excuses as ways to make them seem like they were less of a human being than everyone else in order to justify their treatment. In the same way, you see all over the place. You see liberals attacking conservatives, saying that they're dumb backwoods hicks or some other type of idea, or conservatives saying that liberals are a bunch of libtards, is the latest thing. And then you even have the young old, this old okay boomer thing, or dumb millennials type of language. It's all this idea of trying to find a way that you can dismiss this person's opinion because they are other, instead of trying to listen to each other and to discover what is driving each other's thoughts and other people's ideas. And I fully admit, this is a two-way road. Both sides need to be willing to listen. You can't just be looking at ways that you can argue. And Jesus is trying to remind us of this, and it's a constant theme through all of the Gospels, is this reminder that we are all children of God, and to remember to listen and to love one another. Amen.